All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick. I am at LaGuardia Airport, Drew, as you can hear. My flight is delayed to Indianapolis to the Combine. We've been able to put men on the moon, but apparently we can't put fog lights on planes, given that the fog in New York City has set me back. But we will push on. We're going to talk about the NFL draft today, which is pertinent, given I'm headed out to the Combine. And then we'll talk about some next team markets as well, which are usually pretty beatable. But in terms of the NFL draft, very weird betting event. I will give some background in terms of kind of the process and how it works at books. But do you want to talk a little bit about how just betting the draft has changed over the years?
Yeah. Well, we had, it's always been a niche, kind of unique, different way to bet, right? This is an information-based marketplace, which means that you don't have as much, this is what fair ought to be. Once things become known, prices will only move one way. There are less opportunities to shoot for a middle or try to kind of take advantage of equity that you've built up by taking a position early and then the market moving with you, because there's no reason to do that. When the news gets out and things are kind of known quantities and known outcomes, then there's no coming back price wise, which makes it kind of unique because for the most part, you're maybe at the beginning of the process looking for some long shot prices when staking is difficult, and you're just like, well, this is not as certain as the market thinks. And then later on in the cycle, you're very, very more than willing to jump into, what is high likelihood that is priced as probably going to happen. So like day of draft, you're just firing into minus 600, minus 800. That should be minus 6,000, minus 8,000. And so it's a very weird and kind of unique experience as a bettor. And I think ultimately, the marketplace is getting sharper. They're starting to, what the offerings have kind of gone up and down in terms of, how many options they're going to give you to bet on these sort of things, how much liquidity they're really willing to try to accumulate on these things, and different books will offer different things for different stakes, and so you really, and there's no odds screen. So you really, really got to shop around. You got to check prices. You got to look multiple places. You got to keep an eye on, what you would define as your market making books, which are taking the biggest limits, and how those places are moving. You got to check exchanges. You got to check basically everything to get information on what the market actually looks like, which makes it fun for me. Certainly, I enjoy that part of the process. And then, simply just combing through beat reporters, information and news that they are kind of either saying on podcasts or writing in columns or tweeting. That stuff has a huge ability to move markets in significant magnitude. Just today, you're seeing and hearing a lot of quotes from Ryan Poles. The Bears, obviously, we're going to get more into the Bears and how they influence this year's draft in particular a lot. But whenever he's on the podium speaking, like, these numbers are going to move because he's going to say things that can be interpreted as clues that people are going to run with one way or the other about what that team is going to do. And then that's going to trickle into the second choice. That's going to trickle into third choice, et cetera. So, it's a really fun game. It's totally different than trying to come up with fares for the NBA, where it's literally just execute. Okay, that's what the price should be. Let's go find, let's go look at the market, see what it's giving us. Like this is just a totally different game, and for those reasons, it's a little bit more fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely is an information game. Whoever has best access to the best information, that is where the edge comes from. Say a couple of things more inside baseball. One, with limits. I think limits are getting progressively smaller and smaller on the draft, for better or worse. I mean, better at the time, worse now, but like Paolo Banchero going 1, that forever changed the landscape because books got absolutely crushed on that. And I think they took a look in the mirror and we're not going to get crushed on that again. I think Trayvon Walker as well, like a lot of people are on that at an early price. And that is the thing with these markets, is that there is no, they don't represent, particularly now, they don't represent any real sort of truth because limits are so small. Favorites flip all the time. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, they flipped as favorites. Aiden Hutchinson and Trayvon Walker, these guys were flipping around. Even towards the end, like I remember betting like 2 minutes before the draft started, Aiden Hutchinson at -110 to go second to Detroit, when my understanding is the true price was like -10,000. And so there are opportunities like that do arise. But what have you found with limits?
Yeah, no, the that part of the equation is fascinating, because for me, at least as a bettor who's primarily playing offshore, I'm really only can bet one place. And the offerings are very narrow, but they'll take a decent bet, and they will move the number once you bet, and they'll let you rebet. So you can pretty much get whatever ultimate stake you want, conditional on the fact that the auto mover is going to give you a worse and worse and worse and worse price. It's always fun early in the process, just trying to test the what are the auto mover settings on this market, right? Let's hit an 80-1 and just see exactly how much that moves, and then how does it redistribute, and you know, kind of gauging Raptors testing the fence and in some of those markets is a lot of fun. And ultimately I think of maybe that being sort of the a bit of the answer key, because they will take $1,000 a click. On day of, it goes up. But on day of, they know as well as you know. And so there's a lot less kind of opportunity to really kind of come in with a hammer on something that's a surprise. But hey, last year it happened. I sat there and I watched the screen for 5 hours on the day of the draft, trying to get an idea of who was going to go number 2, because it was not known. There were only a couple people who absolutely had the nuts on number 2 overall last year. And there was such a wash of misinformation and speculation and just uncertainty as to what was going to happen that it took until an hour or two before the draft started before, you could have gotten CJ Stroud at what was the number, 3-1 plus 350 for $1,000 a click, and you could have just clicked that into oblivion because there were people on the other side betting the other option, so they just left it up. That was a pretty interesting and unique experience considering how it played out. And then that type of stuff I think is still maybe fruitful in terms of really being able to get a decent bet down on something that ultimately is a decided outcome.
Yep. And I'll say, having worked at a book and managed risk on NFL drafts, on all types of drafts, like this is the day one of the NFL draft is about the worst day of the year for a trading team, just because everyone thinks it's like March Madness. March Madness kind of takes, like, it's all of the concentration and liquidity is on core markets for the most part. Like that's actually pretty easy to manage from a purely trading perspective. From a tech platform load thing, it's a bit more stressful. But with the draft, like, you have all this attention, you have all these markets, you don't really know what the truth is. And the other thing too that makes a lot of these markets vulnerable is that, and I can't speak for every book, but not all of the derivative markets are kind of tethered together from a tech platform perspective. So like if you change Jason Tatum's points prop from 27.5 to 28.5 or whatever, most books now, that will just automatically ripple through to his points, rebounds, assist prop, his points plus assist prop, everything, his alternate lines. All of that will just update automatically. NFL draft markets don't work like that because it's an infrastructure that you have to build for just purely 1-2 days of the year. And so it's like, all right, well, so Tristan Wirfs is now, he's the first offensive lineman off the board. Now we have to manually change like 30 different markets that are connected to that outcome. And that just leaves stale prices. I think books are getting to the point now where, limits have just deteriorated on this stuff. Like, it's all right, well, we don't want to worry about the third offensive lineman taken. So, we will just hard limit max bet $50 stake on that. And that's we're not even going to look at the market. So I think that has been a trend. By the way, I'm looking at a group of Buddhist monks right now as we speak, which I feel like is a bad omen for my 6th man of the year position. Or maybe it's a good omen. Either way, coming off Malik Monk's worst game in a while, only playing 21 minutes. I feel like Chris Duarte is actually a big factor in the 6th man of the year race now, because he's starting to play minutes in the rotation, potentially at the expense of Monk. I was joking with a friend that Chris Duarte is not the hero Gotham wanted, but he might be the hero Gotham needs. The 6th man of the year market to pave the way for other lads. Anyway, back to the draft. Anything for this season that you think is particularly pertinent? And we'll get into specific markets, but anything macro level in terms of, movements off of the combine or pro days or just anything of that nature?
Yeah, two things macro for this year that I think are important. The first is last year, the Houston Texans found their way into the second best quarterback in the draft process by a lot of evaluators, and he changed the franchise forever, right? Like everybody now has job security indefinitely in Houston. And that is a very different kind of feeling relative to this time last year when it felt like, man, they could just have a clean sweep here and start over at the in the executive, in the C-suite, and no one would be surprised. So that kind of swing and hit is probably going to induce a lot of other teams that have quarterback question marks to take their swing this year. Like if we can, it doesn't take much of an imagination if you're in that room and you're just like, hey man, look what happened to the Texans for hitting with CJ Stroud. Let's go find our CJ Stroud. We don't have the first pick in the draft. That's okay. We're going to just grind it that much harder and we're going to find our quarterback. And as you look at the current potential teams who could draft quarterbacks, obviously the top 3 in the draft are all teams that you would identify as likely QB drafters. Then you have a whole wave in the late top 10 and into the early teens that are also very likely, in my opinion, to be shopping, at least exploring quarterbacks, if not already like on that path of we're just going to evaluate all these guys and take the best guy when he's available. So those teams also, kind of positioning themselves higher in the draft with trade ups, I think is very likely. I don't expect that any of the top 3 are all that likely to trade down, but you never know. The Cardinals certainly are in a position where, hey, they want wide receiver talent. They could talk themselves into Marvin Harrison Jr. as the next Calvin Johnson, surely, but they could also talk themselves into trading down to 8 with the Falcons, letting the Falcons take a quarterback at 4, trading down into the early teens with the Raiders or the Broncos or someone like that. So to let those teams swing away at a quarterback. Chargers are in the exact same position. Like they're kind of in hey, our pick is for sale if somebody wants to come up and get one of these quarterbacks who are available. And so I think, after you get past the top 3, you have a lot of opportunity for trade down in the top 10, and you have a lot of quarterback neediness kind of right in that next tier of teams. And ultimately, if we see 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10, I don't think we should be surprised if we see 5 quarterbacks go in the top half of the draft. I don't think we should be surprised considering the teams who have needs for quarterbacks and how much of a smash hit CJ Stroud was last year in terms of changing a franchise's direction. So I'm expecting to see a lot of quarterbacks go.
Yep.
The other kind of side plot is a lot of other offensive players. There's elite talent at the wide receiver position, elite talent at offensive line in this year's draft, which means you could see something like 19 or 20 offensive players drafted in the first round, which would be a huge, huge tilt relative to the defensive players. So very intrigued to see what type of number they open for offensive versus, offensive players in round 1, for instance. I think that could be kind of tough to price this year, considering how many wide receivers you could see. And also that could ultimately, like when there's that much talent at the wide receiver position, do a lot of those guys slide into early round 2? Very possible. So, I think it's, this is going to be an offensive heavy first round generally, just with the talent and with the quarterback likelihood. And that kind of helps start to shape things at the top of the draft, in my opinion.
Yep. No, that makes sense to me. I will say, before we get to the specific markets, the last 2 macro points I would make is that if you want to win money betting the draft, and there is, outside of betting offshore and maybe a couple of books that will take bets, it's not great for your accounts if you're blasting into draft markets, because if you bet a 20-1 shot that firms into -110 and then just wins, then that's probably going to flag something that you knew something. So I'd say that if you are betting the draft, the 2 ways that you're going to win on the draft is, 1, if you're just sniping stale markets, which whatever, is not the most wholesome betting existence, but it is a way to make money. And if you pick off bad prices, you may win that way. And then the other way is really you just need to expand your network, because that is where so many edges come on the draft, is just by making the right contacts and just having people in your network who do get, inklings as to how things are going to go. So those are really the two ways to win on the draft.
Yeah. And by the way, it doesn't have to be inside information. It can just be a network of people who are like very good at combing the internet for information and are, because like you're not going to listen to every podcast. You're not going to read every snippet. You literally need help from everybody else in your network to get that stuff done. And that's where a lot of the best nuggets ultimately come from, is people, stuff that was just publicly available. and just somebody you happen to know read it and told you about it.
Yep, absolutely. All right, spring training is here. So for those looking to get ahead on the upcoming MLB season, grab your Roto-World Baseball Draft Guide. It's loaded with comprehensive positional rankings, projections, and player profiles to ensure your draft is a success. Visit NBCSports.com/draft guide and use code BASEBALL24 to get 10% off at checkout. All right, top 3 pick markets. Caleb Williams is minus 1,600 to go 1. Drake May 11-1 to go 2. Drake May is then only minus 135 to go second. So that's not necessarily a binary thing, where May will definitely go second if he doesn't go 1. Jaden Daniels is plus 145 to go second. And then he is the favorite to go third ahead of Drake May. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. is kind of the smoky in the third overall pick market. He's plus 270 behind the 2 QBs. Do you have any read on how these markets are going to shake out?
Well, we kind of referenced it earlier, but Polls doing media today had to quote something along the lines of, if we trade Justin Fields, we want to make sure he has, he is a good fit. Like, they obviously care about him as a young man and want him to, still be able to kind of pursue a career, albeit not with the Bears, from what it sounded like, which I think is kind of influencing the market to sort of nudge 90% up to 95 that the Bears are going to ultimately end up just sticking with the number 1 pick and taking Caleb Williams. I think some of the other information that's out there that the Bears are exploring trades for the 1 and stuff like that, well, of course they should be. They should be listening to everybody's offer. They got away with one of the most impressive heists of the year last year in procuring a top tier wide receiver and this year's number 1 for their number 1 pick last year from the Panthers. And ultimately, like, that was a little bit of a dice roll. No one knew the Panthers were going to be quite that bad. But certainly expecting that the Bears have now fortified their talent enough, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, and have have enough draft capital in this draft that this is probably the last bite they have at the apple of taking a rookie quarterback and developing him on a rookie deal, which I think makes the kind of calculus on this very straightforward. If the Bears are in any way kind of doing the numbers themselves, they realize this and they're like, okay, this is it. This is our last chance to do this. So this is, generational prospect. Let's roll the dice here. Let's go. And I think that being sort of the realistic expectation is perfectly fine right now. And until we hear specific otherwise, like, there's rumblings that Caleb Williams may pull a Eli Manning type of thing and try to specifically pick his destination as far as a city and a team goes. And we'll see. I don't know that his camp and his team have quite that much power in the current state of the NFL. And I think ultimately the Bears are probably just going to do what they want to do regardless. But, the second and third picks get very interesting because, number one, it's kind of funny to me that, the Commanders have the second overall pick, and in large part because of the quality of play they got from their UNC quarterback, and now they're favorite to take another UNC quarterback who's 2 years younger, and ultimately maybe the same exact development project. But whatever the case is, there are smart people that think Drake May is very good. There are smart people that think Drake May be a better prospect than Caleb Williams, and we are living in the shadow of the second quarterback taken being the clear best quarterback in that draft, and no one really outside of our own Chris Sims was all that loud saying it during the draft process last year. So who knows exactly how good Drake May will be, but I think it's fine to expect ultimately that the Commanders are going to land there in terms of taking him as a prospect, just because there's a little bit more certainty with him presumably as far as pocket passing than Jaden Daniels. But it's tough to say that with a strong conviction, considering I don't really do a ton of evaluation of players at the college level. So yeah, Drake May being your current favorite for number 2 is fine, but I think that's probably a very soft market. Like that's one of the ones where it could be like a Bryce Young, CJ Stroud type of situation from last year, where that flips back and forth a couple times just based on comments from an offensive assistant at a pro day, right? Like that would not shock me at all if there's some jockeying between those two quarterbacks there. But I would say it's relatively high conviction that the Commanders are going to take a quarterback with 2. It's just a matter of who they pref between those two guys. And, could a guy like J.J. McCarthy sneak into the discussion? There's certainly a lot of people buzzing about how, teams are a lot higher on him than, the draft, people would have expected. He's 20-1. Don't mind taking a shot on that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think when I get out to Indy, which was my flight just delayed again while you were talking, may not be forever, but the 2 guys I'm most interested in asking people about are what is Drake May's realistic floor? Like, is he actually going to fall past 2? And then how real is the JJ McCarthy stuff? Who I think that, most NFL fans and watchers think it's kind of laughable that JJ is being talked about as a potential top 2 pick, but it seemed laughable at the time that Trayvon Walker was going to go 1.
Yeah.
And it's kind of turned out laughable a couple of years into his career that he ended up going 1 over Aiden Hutchinson and others. But it doesn't really, in terms of betting these markets, it doesn't really matter. It's just what a team's actually going to do. Marvin Harrison Jr., who is one of the best wide receiver prospects of all time. He is, I think initially people thought that he was going to be the 3rd guy, but with the comments coming out of the Patriots and seemingly their lean towards quarterback, he is now favored. He's minus 190 to be drafted by the Cardinals. The Patriots are the 2nd favorite, the Bears 3rd. Do you have any lean on where Harrison goes? Do you think he just ends up chalky and he goes to Arizona with Kyler Murray?
Yeah, so this comes down to the kind of understanding the rest of the fabric of the quarterback market, because I do think the Cardinals are absolutely in a willing position to trade that pick. I mean, for all I know, their scouts have already fallen in love with Harrison, and this is a done deal. I don't know that. But I do know that the Cardinals are, and they were last year, and they will likely be this year, intrigued to try to give up that 4th pick for a team that is going to draft a rookie quarterback. And if you kind of think a little bit, don't even look at last year's example, but just think a little bit about it. Like trading your early pick for a team that's drafting a rookie, you are very likely to get an early pick the next year for that, because it is just very rare for rookie quarterbacks who are starting, their rookie seasons to have crazy success like CJ Stroud did. Now, they got burned by that last year, specifically trading the 3, but you have a front office there that I think you can say is going to aggressively explore trades. Adding a little bit of fuel to that, like they are very needy in the wide receiver position. Obviously, like that is a very clear, place that they are going to be evaluating. I have heard that there is some relatively soft conviction across scouts that Marvin Harrison Jr. is that big of a delta over Malik Neighbors or over, wide receiver in the 2nd tier of your choice. Like I think that there are people that would say that the gap is a little bit smaller. There are people that have questions about Marvin Harrison Jr.'s speed. And he's not going to run, so it's a chance that there's a little bit of a drop in his premium. Right. Trading ahead of the 5 makes sense as well, because again, we're expecting that the Chargers at 5 are going to be open for business to trade also. And so that entire cluster of teams that could fall in love with a guy like JJ McCarthy, that includes the Falcons, the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, maybe a surprise team as well. We're talking like 5 teams that could want that 4th pick to get their shot at QB4 in this draft. And so for the, if that happens, then Marvin Harrison Jr. becomes a little bit of a free fall. We're not exactly sure where he's going to land. He could land with the LA Chargers, which is kind of an absurd price. The LA Chargers, we know, are cutting ties with Mike Williams. Keenan Allen is quite old. Quentin Johnson might have been a bust that the previous regime drafted. And so if I'm getting weird, this player to be drafted, but Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm kind of not crazy, thinking that the Chargers are more of a factor than the market expects, and they're at 18-1 right now.
Yep, and Lance Zierlein from NFL Network said that he believes there will be teams who do rank Malik Neighbors ahead of Harrison on their board. So potentially some scope for it to get weird. We'll say if the Cardinals do draft Marvin Harrison and he is as good as advertised, they kind of become an interesting team in some futures markets, because that offense is really good when Kyler Murray came back. And the defense isn't great, but there's more scope for defenses to get good in the off season or season to season than there is for offenses to magically do that. So if you're looking at like long shot coach of the year candidates, like Jonathan Gannon, I think is 25-1, and that team won 4 games last year, and they have a really good quarterback who people forget, like 2.5 years ago, Kyler Murray was like MVP favorite at midseason, that type of range, when the Cardinals were the 1 seed before the wheels fell off. And I don't think he's really that caliber of player, but he certainly has a higher level than he's reached than most quarterbacks have. And wouldn't be shocking to me if that team did have a bit of upside and was able to, make a 6-7 win improvement out of the question. Before we close out, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, their next team markets. This is DraftKings pricing. Previous draft markets we're talking about was FanDuel pricing. Saquon is plus 100 to go back to the Giants. Josh Jacobs minus 320 to go back to the Raiders. I interviewed Saquon in Vegas. He didn't tell me where he's going to go, but it was largely, typical friendly free agent type of speak. But do sense there is maybe an expiration date has been reached with the Giants, and that is why he is even money to go back to New York, and Jacobs is conversely, the market's saying he's north of a 75% chance to go back to the Raiders, albeit with a fair bit of book percentage in that market. Do you have any read on either of these two?
I thought the comments that GM for the Giants, Joe Schoen, hopefully I pronounced that right. Schoen.
Weird. I think it's Sean. I could be wrong.
Sean. He was on with the PFT, Pro Football Talk guys, and his commentary was kind of interesting because he was basically like, we were pleasantly surprised by the higher than expected cap number. So that gives them a little bit more financial flexibility. Giants are a team that we didn't even mention in the potential mix for QB in round 1, but they're there. And so I think ultimately kind of retaining a player of the caliber of Saquon Barkley, who is going to be tough to replace with available free agents, and you don't want to be spending draft capital, I don't think, if you're the Giants on running back at this point. So it would make sense if he ultimately lands back with the Giants. Now he's a great fit for a lot of teams though, and he may be looking more at kind of jump starting a chance for a ring as opposed to whatever the rebuild is going to ultimately be in New York. And so he may just ultimately elect to try to find greener pastures in that regard, as opposed to just trying to get as much money as the Giants are willing to give him to stay and kind of help, bridge this gap to the next vision of the offense. But I think he's a very interesting player. He's a very unique talent, and the marketplace for running backs has been reduced to the point where keeping him at whatever price you're going to get him at is probably going to seem pretty good in hindsight. And there are very few kind of long-term running back contracts you could point to and be like, boy, that ended up being a great deal for that team. Right. And so maybe ultimately it's just wise for the Giants to try to move on. But I could see very well that he stays in New York, as you want some, there's a very clear player loyalty in the New York Giants franchise generally. And I think that might ultimately help kind of nudge them in the direction of keeping Barkley.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I think that from the Giants fans that I've spoken to, and this isn't a read on the market or anything, it's just they are pretty ready to move on from Saquon, and just the idea of him having, a large contract at that position, given the state of this team, By the way, we have competing information. Some say Schoen, and but the Giants' official website says that it is pronounced Shane, Joe Shane. So we'll go with Joe Shane. Sorry for butchering your name 3 different ways, Joe, but Elena Rabakina got over it, so I'm sure you will as well. Josh Jacobs, it seems like he's likely going to go back to the Raiders. They're minus 320. Doesn't seem like the franchise tag is going to be used on any of these guys, which I suppose makes sense just given how relatively loaded the free agent field is for running backs between Barkley, Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard. It feels like the Jacobs is going to go back, but what do you think?
Yeah, this one I'm not exactly sure why the market is so sure that that's going to happen. His tape didn't impress at all last year, and you really look at the body of work, and it was kind of maybe a one-off. At least you could draw that conclusion to a degree. And so I don't know that the market is going to be especially hot, and maybe that's why it's so likely that he just comes back and plays on a team-friendly deal. But yeah, that one surprised me a little bit. I would have expected both of these markets to be at or around a pick 'em, and Raiders at minus 320 seems like there may be a bet against there. I just am not exactly sure who. Like none of the teams that are kind of near the top really stood out to me as all that likely to go get him. We knew they're kind of teams that are in the mix for needing a running back, so to speak, but haven't really seen or don't really see the link between the offensive minds with the LA Chargers, with the Texans, with the Ravens, that really kind of matches the skill set that Jacobs has, and so I would guess that there may be a surprise suitor that we just don't see coming, and we shouldn't be shocked. But for me, at least, 320 seems a bit absurd.
Yep. Well, it probably just is absurd because these markets are not particularly liquid or reflecting any sort of truth. So yeah, I don't think there is an obvious bet in this market. It seems like everyone else is relatively evenly placed, but I agree. I'd certainly be trying to back the other side of minus 320 to go back to the Raiders, but it doesn't seem like that is necessarily on offer. All right, LaGuardia has ramped it up with the frequency of announcements, so while we're in a quiet spot, we'll get out of here. Don't forget to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks to those of you watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, don't forget to rate and subscribe. From Jay Croucher and Drew Dinsick, we'll see you soon.